when did you first meet Cedric?
That's a very good question. I've been thinking about that. I believe it may have been on the Your Fascination sessions.
Yeah, that was a long time ago.
Because, yeah, Thurston was producing, and I think we got Cedric to do something. I can't remember what, to be honest. As you say, I was thinking that the other day. This is between 35 and 38 years ago.
I know.
It's horrifying, but my memory is a little bit shaky. But certainly around that time, that was when we first met, and then we didn't meet again for quite a while afterwards. But then there was a point where I had a college gig come up last minute, Ian and I, and they said, "Can you put a 4-piece band in for us?" And I said, "Well, I'm sure I can," because they were offering money, and that always is a big incentive. So I said yes, and I phoned up, and he said, "Oh, my dear chap, over the moon, don't you worry." The typical Cedric, and Ben Hurley, who I just toured with. So that was good, and we did it, and he was absolutely fabulous. And then at that point, I got to know him really well, and then we formed a band. That same band carried on doing quite a lot of gigs down the south of the country. And during that time, we were doing Gary tours and then doing gigs like that. And I got to know him really well. When we stopped working with Gary, then Ced and I and Naz and little Mel for a while had various incarnations of bands, and then eventually it was just Ced and I and Naz, and we did 3 or 4 holiday park seasons. So I worked with him 6 nights a week for 7 or 8 months of the year for 3 or 4 years non-stop, until he had all his gear nicked and he had to stop. And that was horrifying. It really was. And that was kind of when we stopped working together, which was really sad, because I've got to give a shout out to Ced here. I miss him every day. He was, without a shadow of a doubt, the best drummer I've ever played with. Not the most technical, the best drummer I've ever played with. He had the ability to play exactly what was required for what you were doing. And he was really good. You know, reggae, soul specifically, he was fabulous at, from his time with the Q-Tips and Hazel O'Connor and stuff like that. He had his groove was fierce. Everyone absolutely agreed with that. I remember touring with Ben and doing a gig with, we were supporting Joe Satriani, and they had Stuart Ham on bass and the guy from Meatloaf on drums. And at Manchester, in a bloody awful hotel that got bombed, the drummer came running down the stairs to me and said, "Do you play with Gary Numan?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Fucking Cedric Sharpley, one of the best drummers I've ever seen." And never spoke to me again. I couldn't disagree with him. He was absolutely right. But Ced had a massive reputation amongst drummers. But the public, he wasn't shy, but he never really blew his own trumpet, man. Which is a shame, because he was a fabulous player, really, really good. Listen, not if you want to start talking about jazz and Steve Gadd and all that, then no, we're not talking Ced. But for the kind of stuff that I do, the stuff that Gary does, the soul band, he was absolutely fab. That's my advert for Ced. And now, so I met him about 38 years ago, and I worked with him a lot in the intervening periods. And then, sadly, for the last 10 years of his life, because he'd had all his drums and his gear stolen, he kind of went back to playing much more parochially. Do you know what I mean? He was gigging locally with friends of his, and it was kind of stuff that he could easily do. And so, although we didn't lose contact, we didn't play together. We were always waiting for one of those projects where we'd think, yeah, that would be great. And then sadly, of course, he died, which was shocking. Very shocking. Put it this way, it stopped me from drinking.
It
Well,
was
it did.
indeed, and I always found him talking to him one of the most humblest guys I've ever spoke to.
Absolutely,
Mm,
absolutely. He was a really famous guy, but
mm,
you'd think you were out with your mate from down the road. You know, we laughed so much, it was unbelievable. He was very funny, and we did have an enormously good time. We did a couple of tours of Germany together, and we just hammered most of the time, but just laughed.
mm.
Still played well, still had a great time, but and on tour with Gary, to be honest, I shared with said for 2 or 3 tours. The first tour I shared with John Webb, and then the next 2 or 3 I shared with Ced, and it was just extraordinarily funny. He was the only man you could leave a room and say, Ced, we're going to leave. We're leaving, Ced, and you go, yeah, yeah. And you could push him out of the door in front of you, turn around to lock the door, and he would be coming out of it. I don't know how the fuck he managed to do it. He was always the last guy out the room. Just extraordinary. Big G used to have to come up, the security guard used to have to come up sometimes and drag us both out by the feet. It was just so funny. So funny. And of course, he always wore the hat.
Yeah.
Including, and I'm not telling any stories now, I think, in bed, which was quite extraordinary. We'd be sharing a room, and he'd be across the room, stark bollock naked, apart from a fucking hat. It was I mean, one of the most surreal things I have ever seen. And I remember in Newcastle, the fans had bought us, a shed load of drinks, and we staggered up to bed, and we both had I had a scotch or so, and he had a brandy. We were lying there chatting, he had a chat on, and we both fell asleep. And at about 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, we woke up. I said, "Are you all right?" He said, "Yeah, I'm still clutching a glass." And he went, "For medicinal purposes, I think." And next this brandy. And I was just like, oh my God. And Big G walked in at that time and said, "You two are animals. Get out of here and get on that fucking bus." And off we went to wherever it was. So yeah, but he was a very, very unassuming guy, very funny, and we did laugh a lot. Yeah, no, that was cool. I was really pleased Gary and the guys all turned up at his funeral. So that was great. I was very knocked out with that, because obviously it's very difficult for certainly for Gary with his public profile, but he did turn up. So I think it kind of shows the esteem that he held him in. He was absolutely right for that gig, you know what I mean? It's great drummer. And good fun. I understand someone's got his drum kit now.
Yes. A guy, oh God, I can't remember his name, Twig, but it'll come to me.
Is it the guy from the Liquid Engineers?
Yes, indeed.
Yeah.
And they've been raising a lot of money for the bursary as well. So
oh, that's good, right?
Which is Dave Twig. Sorry, it's come to me. Yeah, and I forget. Yeah. Anyway, he's got the drum kit. People sit on it and do things, and they all contribute towards the bursary. And I think it's been quite amazing this year. Obviously, beginning of the year, I had an idea for a song, and we'd get Chris and Andy Coughlin and people involved and everything.
Yeah.
And Karen Hunter. To push it, and we had an initial target of £700. We've now at just over 3,500.
Oh, brilliant!
So we've put 2 people through for next year. I just want to make it 4,000. As I was talking to Jill about this, that would be a Christmas miracle if we can get 4,000 by Christmas Eve.
Yeah.
I mean, because what I remember talking to Cedric once, and I was telling him, going back about him being so humble about everything, and I said, thanks, you know, because I was doing my book, and I thank you for talking to me. I really appreciate it, you know, and everything. I said, because you were part of Numan back in 79, 80.
Yeah, yeah.
And do you know what? He didn't get it. He was like, well, I was just a session player. I said, no, you were part of the whole thing.
Yeah,
You know,
I agree. But he always, you're right, he was very humble. He saw himself as a jobbing drummer. You know, I'm a drummer. And strangely enough, I played with one or two kind of fairly famous drummers, apart from Ced, and they all had that same kind of approach. They just go, well, I'm just a drummer, you know. And they're not, of course. They're really fabulously talented musicians, but that's how they view themselves. And I think it is true of all those people who are really good. They don't see the value of their own performance. They just go, yeah, I just do this. And I guess it's because they do it very naturally and are easily able to do it, that they don't see how great it actually is. Because, as I say, I work with him a lot, mainly post Numan, and he was very good. I mean, you know, and you'd think, wow, I'd be hard pushed to get other people who could do this. And but he didn't see that at all. He was like, well, I'm the drummer, my dear chap. I just hit the drums very loud. And he did. He was fucking loud. Yeah. The first season we ever did together, we had to replace a band, and we were backing a show. And the show had dancers in, and the drummer they'd had been, I think, possibly quite quiet. We got our gear set up, and then the first night that we did the show, these dancers used to run, and the beginning had a big intro orchestral, and then in came the drums, and off we went. And there were dancers on the stage at that point, and they'd said to us they always had problem hearing where the beat was. And yeah, it started up, and we were playing on click, obviously, on the track. And I started my part, and that was fine. And then Ced came in, and it was like a bloody explosion, and two of the dancers fell off the stage. He was just so powerful a drummer. He had that. He was a big concert player. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
He'd done big concerts. When he hit the drum, you knew exactly where the beat was. There was no messing around. One that was, you know, and that's a very James Brown thing. Where the hell's one? Boof, there it is. That Ced would leave you in no doubt where one was whatsoever. And that is, the value of that is enormous. And sometimes it's not even just the loudness. It's the attack and the snap with which good drummers play the rhythm and hit the groove, and you go, wow, I know exactly where I am. There's not a problem here. Because my timing wanders fucking all over the place. But I can push and pull in the knowledge that back there is someone who is absolutely pinning it down tight, and that's what he would do, and still sound complete. And that's his. A lot of the big drummers have it. They have the ability to sound as though they're playing freehand, but they're actually playing with a click. And Ced could do that. The guy from Earth, Wind and Fire can do that. Steve Gadd can do that. All those big drummers. You go, wow, this is really great. It's got really good groove and a lot of feel, but there's a click going on. And most drummers, if you hear them playing with a click, will sound like a bloody metronome.
Yeah.
Ced did. He could just ease around that groove enough to make it sound really natural. And some of the fills he did were fab, right across 2 or 3 bars. And you think, fuck, is that going to make it? Yes, it did, every time. Yeah, he was fab. Yeah, really good fun. And then, of course, the first thing Gary did was stop using them. So that was that, you know.
Yeah,
we used machines because, God knows why. At one point, I did ask him, how did you become famous? You know, cars, all this, that, and the other. And he said, we went to the studio and recorded tracks. I said, well, should we try that? It might not be a fucking bad idea, you know.
Yeah.
No, I don't want to do that. No. I want, and you know, that I understand he wanted to, he was clearly going through, I think after, what was the album before Berserk? Was it Warriors?
Yeah, yeah.
Right. I think that was about the last one where the band were heavily involved. From Berserker, Berserker, they'd done quite a lot of stuff. Andy Coghlan, great bass player. But then I think we replaced, it was a lid drum for a start. We replaced a lot of the samples. So I was involved towards the back end of Berserker. And then, of course, in the Fury, there was no involvement with people at all. It was Gary.
Yeah.
And 6,000 machines, all of which we were programming. So I think it was by virtue of being an experiment, really, more than anything, to see if it could be done, and it certainly could. It was very successful in technical terms, even though he now hates the album and says that whole period was he didn't know what he was doing. And I suspect he was probably right. He had lost his way musically. And he was also, I think, very conscious that people thought that he wasn't a musician.
Yeah, I get that.
His tunes were simplistic, blah, blah, blah. And everything was, it's not, it's not loads of funk and jazz and this, that, and the other. So I think he wanted to do that. And I think we certainly achieved that, although it was all mechanical, obviously. We did have some great input, Keith Beauvais playing guitar. We had Andy do some stuff. We had Martin Elliott came in. I missed the Pino Palladino stuff. That was earlier, which was a shame. By that time they'd fallen out. But
seems to be quite a common thing.
Recurring theme, yeah. So it was fun enough. We didn't. I never fell out with
good.
that. No, I didn't know. We just, I was old. I can't blame him. He got a younger band in, and Sed and I were kind of too old. Hey, listen, I don't blame him. It was very much a kind of a record company thing. I can't blame him for that. And so we didn't fall out. We just didn't work together. I spoke to him again after that, quite some time later, just before he did his whatever the album was, I forget, the one that was heavily influenced by Nine Inch Nails.
Could be any of them.
Yeah, exactly. And I think I got the call from Tony. He said, "Mike, do you want to go and see Gary? Because I don't think, is there anything that we can do?" I said, "I don't know, it'd be great." So I slotted down. That's when he was still living in Essex.
Right.
Shot down there and saw him, and he kind of played me stuff he was doing, and I for about an hour or so, and I kind of held my hands up and said, "Gary, I can't do anything with this, mate. Several problems. I don't like it. It's not what I do, and you'd be paying me for no reason whatsoever, really. So best you do that and do what you're going to do." And he did very successfully. So, clearly that was the right thing for him to do. But I had no vibe off that at all, and to a very great extent still don't.
No, I'm not. As I've said a million times, I'm not a huge lover of the newer stuff.
No,
I haven't been for several years, but it's fine because Gary's going in that way.
Of course.
I'm still liking that way, and it's not. I'm looking back at 79, 80. I just don't particularly like that style of music anymore, or now, should I say? It's not me being an old, git wanting Gary to play 79, 80. It's just that I'm not what I liked back then and what I like now. Obviously, loads of different stuff, jazz, loads of stuff. I'm not a huge fan of what he does nowadays, but I'm still a fan. But
yeah. I'm the same. I think what he does is there's some great stuff. I think is it Brooks, the guy producer?
David.
David
Aid Fenton.
Aid Fenton. Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, Aid Fenton. He's very good.
Yeah.
He does the stuff for Gary really, really well, and it's great production. And The one thing he has managed to do is get his vocals so he can actually fucking hear them, which we
Yeah.
never could before, because he was always worried about people hearing his voice. So it was always buried in the track by his design. And you have to remember that we never produced Gary. We were only ever co-producers.
Right, okay.
So we all took the decision kind of together. But at the end of the day, it was Gary's decision because we'd come in as a programming team under the auspices of Colin Thurston, and we took over a kind of production role, but it was really parts production. I guess we were really mainly arrangers and programmers, although we did do a lot of work with the engineers as well to get the sound. So it was a bit of a bizarre, it wasn't a standard producer's role where you kind of go, right, I'm the producer, we'll do this, and I'll mix it and we'll do that. We kind of subsumed all roles together. So it was quite weird. But I think he's probably right. I think he probably was going down the wrong path at the time. Although, obviously, at the time, you don't think it is. You think it's the right path. Otherwise, you fucking wouldn't do it. So, I think, yeah. So, looking back, yeah, possibly he was right. I don't know. Well, he was right. He's been much more successful now than he was then. So,
who knows? Who knows?
I think that's a kind of a matter of absolute economics. He is much more successful now.
Yes, I mean, and I think Gary once said it. I remember reading. He was saying that, you know, on his coach when people come around after, and he has a lecture of people where you went wrong and you done this, you shouldn't have done that, and he's right what he says. Well, he did what he wanted to do.
Yeah, at the time, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's easy with hindsight to say that was wrong then. I mean, you know,
we could all do it, couldn't we?
Exactly. I mean, we did some of those bizarre things.
Yeah.
At one point, he said, "Can we copy a Janet Jackson track?" And I was kind of like, "Well, we can." So we kind of did. Not the track, the nature of it, you know.
Yeah.
And then he said, "Now let's make it sound like me," and that's when it all fell to pieces.
Yeah.
Janet Jackson sounds are right for Janet Jackson.
It's
not necessarily for Gary. So, you know, there was a lot of experimenting. I think he learned, as we did, a lot during that phase. I just wish that we could have used more of Ced.
Yeah.
And, well, more of Russ as well, because I only ever really worked with Russ on Berserker. After that, it tended to be a series of, I have no idea who the fuck played.
Yeah.
I mean, Keith obviously did quite a lot, Keith Beauvais. But at one time, Pete Gage from Chicago came. I mean, fuck that. That was under the Miles Copeland regime.
Yeah.
Miles said some of the most extraordinary things known to man. Just as a brief kind of couple of things. One of them, he says, "I'll send Pete Gage down from Chicago." We all went, "What?" From the band Chicago. I mean, what the fuck's he got? Anyway, he came down and took a wah-wah pedal out. At which point Gary said, "You best fuck off now." And that was that. That was him. The other one was, you know, we got slated a lot, Gary and I, during the Outland period, because we did a cover of a Prince song, 1999, and
yes.
you got the look.
That's it, yeah.
Yeah. Now, the reason we did that was because Miles told us we had to do a cover, at least one. So we did. Gary was into Prince at the time. We did. That was good. You got a look. That'll be great. That'll go down well. And Miles said, "Yeah, no, I didn't mean that. I thought more something like Lonnie Donegan's 16 Tons. Yeah. At which point I just left the room and said, "You know what? I think I'll go home because I have no idea what this guy's fucking talking about." But that was the kind of bizarre advice, because, you know, we did Outland twice and we did it once. And Miles said, no, I don't like any of that. So we did it all again, and he still didn't bloody like it, but that was it. I think Gary said, well, I'm not doing it again. And in fact, I think the first version we did was probably a lot better than the version that actually got released. However, I remember doing a fucking trumpet solo then. Well, please. I mean, it was so, you know, it was so bizarre. And then there was the covers and so forth, and we were working in there. And then he sent down a couple of guys to do a remix of something, and they were real kiddies with their hats on backwards type of thing, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
And they were dancing around and twisting knobs, saying, "This is really, really great. Isn't this fantastic?" And yeah, Gary was not impressed, especially when they kept doing stuff with controls that weren't actually active. And kept going, "Oh, this is really, really great." And at one point he leaned over and said, "I think it'd be better if you turn it on." And yeah, so they didn't last very long. They fucked off as well. But that kind of stuff was happening quite a lot. I was still trying to say, should we get some of the guys in and just knock out some, you know, hey, Ed, Chris, I don't fucking know any of them.
Yeah.
But that was because he's quite a stubborn guy.
Well,
He gets an idea, and that's something for a pop star. That's a good thing. You follow your own vibe. But he had very little flexibility in that kind of approach. So I think that's one of the big reasons why we never did. I've been happy to work with anybody really, just to get a different perspective.
It's funny actually. I was talking to Russell Bell several years ago. At the Roundhouse, something.
Yeah.
And anyway, I was saying about how Gary's fans would have loved to have seen the whole band.
Yeah.
Him, Chris, Cedric, you know. It's and he agreed, but you know, it's because Gary is going that way in age, and he wants that younger looking band.
Yeah, and also the Rocky band. I mean, he's kind of gone into that Nine Inch Nails rock arena.
Yeah.
That's his latest thing, and that's you know, it's good for him. If that works for him, that's great. But I don't think the guys that he was using fitted that particular identity. You know, Chris and Rob possibly a bit more, but not really. You know, it was they were them. They were Numan. They weren't this new construction, which is something else. It's Gary. So yeah, I understand the fans wanting that, but hey, I don't know the answer. I haven't really had much contact with Gary over the last 10 years, 12 years perhaps. So I have no real idea how I know he's changed a lot in that, even, you know, within his character, not his music.
Yeah.
But because I know when we first worked with him, he was very insular and very apprehensive of his surroundings. You know, we carried a fucking shotgun in the car, for God's sake. I mean, this is it's quite heavy. And he only really used to come out himself when we went down the airfields and we were flying airplanes, and then kind of that was a Gary that was more human, if you like. You know? But the one that was in the studio and trying to do stuff seemed to be very, you know, kind of apprehensive. I don't know whatever the word to use. Apprehensive about stuff, and I think that's changed significantly. And also, he ate practically nothing that wasn't, you know, McDonald's or whatever. And now he eats healthily, and is being a family man has clearly made quite a lot of difference, as it does to people. You know, that's inevitably going to happen. But so I'm pleased from that point. I think he's changed for the better. But I don't know that person. I know the person. Who
I've always thought that, and I remember talking to Andy McCluskey about this as well, that going back to the early days of Replicas, Pledge Principle, even Telecom maybe, a lot of the simplicity was lost after them.
Yes, it was. And that was probably our fault.
I remember Andy McCluskey saying, you know, like someone running saying, I've got this awesome synth sound. He said, well, it better be fucking good because we're going to have to lose one because they only had an 8-track.
Yeah.
And yes, you could plug it in and get a 16-track and things like this. I know all that. But I often think sometimes, not always, that simplicity is lost.
Very much.
You know,
Gary, whilst we were doing Gary, we were doing Go West, ELP, and somebody else, Joe Fagan, whatever. Especially on, well, is that wouldn't be during the Fury. It would have been during the end of Berserker. So we were doing these other people as well. And they had, you know, Go West, big hits, ELP, yeah, more. But they were more the jazz rock fusion. And so there's 10 billion parts. And Keith Emerson has more fingers on one hand than I've got on both hands and toes. And so he was doing stuff. And, you know, this is, but we were programming, it's highly complicated stuff. And the thing that Gary had, he had massive lines that were totally memorable with a huge sound. Da 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 dum da 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 dum. Now that one still sticks out. That was at the time we were doing da 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 da. So we were doing that track, programming on that track. I couldn't remember that track, although it became #1 worldwide. But I could always remember da 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 dum, which was the Gary track. So he had these huge simple lines. And so I think he kept that for quite a long time during Berserker. And then in the Fury, I think a lot of it was because he could, right? We had this brand new system. We were the people that knew how to use it. We had 24 tracks. We had everything we wanted. And we could do lots of shit. And so we did. Now, the idea had been, especially on the Fury, our first idea was there'd be a song and we'd do stuff. But that didn't turn out to be the case. There'd be a bass riff and probably a 2 and 4 or 4 to the floor drum riff and nothing else. And he'd say, do some overdubs. And we would say, yes, there's fuck all to overdub to yet. Just do some stuff. So we would do sometimes 24 tracks of stuff. Oh, I like that. Oh, I like that. Oh, I like that. And that would be shoved in, and then he'd construct a song around that kind of, not those, they weren't riffs as such, but they were bits. And he'd then suddenly have an idea for a song, he'd do it, and then we'd do more bits. And eventually we end up with this kind of vast array of bits. Now, some of them would be on tape, but also, of course, there'll be a lot, because the PPG was in itself, you can think of it as a tape, it was a sequencer as well. So there was that. And then we had a QX1 sequencer as well that was running in sync. So we could do up to 72 parts with no problem at all. Nowadays, that's not considered a lot because everyone's got Logic and GarageBand and whatever. But in those days, that was a phenomenal amount of stuff compared to most people who were using 8 or 16 tracks. You know, so we could do 72 tracks. And the problem is, we did. And we kind of shoved it in. And it did sound, at the time, we were thinking, this sounds great. And it does sound great.
Oh, yeah.
But you're absolutely right. One of the rules of production is, if you want something to sound big and empty, don't put too much in. The way you make things sound empty is by not putting anything in there. They'll be empty. If you put nothing in, it'll be completely empty. So, you know, somewhere in between is, well, we were trying to get a big, huge, massive empty sound out of 72 parts. And the answer is, that doesn't work.
No.
So, and because we'd done it, and I mean, don't get me wrong, it's not just me, and then this is Gary as well. We're all in there, fucking getting our fingers in, going, wow, this is good. He's playing, I'm doing it. It's all great. And when you've done them, you're very loath to not do them.
Oh, yeah.
Very hard. And this is where an external producer would probably have helped, because he would have come in and said, yeah, we don't need that. We don't need that. Get rid of that. We don't need that. That's the song. There it is. But because Gary and myself and Ian were the producers, we went, well, it all sounds great. Shove it all in. You know?
Yeah.
We went. And we left the engineer tearing his hair out as he was trying to make it all work and stick Gary's vocal in there as well. And that's why for a lot of time, Gary's vocal is fighting with loads of shit on the track because there was loads of shit. And, you know, that's it. Anyway, that's kind of what happened then. And I think now he has gone through that phase and his tracks are much bigger and much faster. But he'd already started from there. He already had that, and he kind of lost sight of that.
Yeah, he did.
And sadly, that's probably our fault. You know, because if we hadn't have been there, I think he might have not done that. But hey, easy to be wise with hindsight, Steve. You know, I mean, we were having a good time, everything was great, and it seemed to us to be the right thing. And him, not just me, you know.
As we said earlier, you know, it's you can look back at a lot of things and say, well, should have done this, should have done that. It's what happens at the time, isn't it? You know.
Yeah, it is. Absolutely right. And as I said at the top, if we didn't think it was right, we wouldn't have done it.
No.
You know, we obviously thought it was great, including Gary. We all went, this is great. And to be honest, I'm still very proud of the work we did, because sound-wise, it's still one of the best sounding albums I've ever done.
Yeah.
The production is diamond bright, it's hard as nails, and it will shear your head off at 50 paces. It is great. And we were trying to get the Jan and Lewis sound, because we just heard them do that album with Diana Ross and with Janet Jackson, and they had that punch, and Prince. They all had that punch you in the face sound.
Yeah.
I've got to be honest, we got it with Gary. It was a punch you in the face sound, but it wasn't the right sound for him. And that was a mistake. You know,
I don't know if it weren't the right sound. I think some of his images didn't quite go
well
with the tracks.
That's out of my control.
As old Numan fans, you were used to the black suit, things like this, the jumpsuits and everything. And suddenly we've got a guy with a white suit and dicky bow, and sometimes.
But that was Bowie, wasn't it? Let's be honest.
Well, yeah, I know.
I've reinvented myself as a Thin Jew, and he had, and he admitted that to me. I don't think I'm talking out of turn. I said, "Isn't that a bit Bowie-esque?" He said, "Fucking hell, I've been trying to be David Bowie for years," and you know, I understand it. I liked the look, but yes, it certainly wasn't a continuation of where he'd been.
No, it wasn't, and it's funny when you're young that sometimes the image can mean quite a bit.
Oh, it does. I understand totally.
To a whole track, song, album. It's.
And of course, there was that whole discussion about girly backing vocals and saxophone, all of that, which I know a lot of the old fans didn't like. I did. I thought they were great, but I'm quite happy to accept that a lot of people didn't. And at the time, Gary did too. We loved it. You know, it was good stuff. Tessa was absolutely fucking brilliant.
Oh, yeah.
You know, and she did stuff, and Karen, and we kind of went, wow, this is great. And yeah, perhaps there was too much. I don't think there was. I don't know. There's too much for what he had done and what he's doing now. But for what he was doing, back to what I was saying, with hindsight, you can go, yeah, shouldn't have done it. But at the time, you know, you put it on in the studio and you go, fucking hell, this sounds great. Let's do that then. And you did it. Later on, you go, yeah, I don't know. perhaps that wasn't the right thing. But at the time, it seemed to be, and yeah, it's of its time. It was what it was, and yeah.
Oh, it
As I
was
say,
amazing.
my only regret is that we didn't get more Cedric on it. So I think
Yeah,
he was on some stuff.
it was
Would
all
have been great.
amazing, whichever way. But to round this up, Mike,
Of course.
your time with Cedric, if you can,
Yep.
in a few words, or take as long as you like, your time with Cedric.
A lot of words. I really enjoyed all the work I did with Ced. We never fell out, ever, which is quite unusual. With any other musicians, there's always some falling out. We laughed a lot. He was, as I say, without a doubt, my favourite drummer. Naz, my old lady, still loves work. We still think about Ced. We keep thinking, oh, wouldn't it be great if Ced was doing that? He was the Rock Museum thing, one of the best bands I played in, with Ben Hurley, Ian, Ced, and myself. And we did some Numan stuff, which we played in Boozers, and they went wild for. They really did. As I said, he was fab. We had a great time. We drank a lot. But it didn't affect us really at the time. We were younger, you know. We were having a good time. I stopped, and he didn't, and that I wish I could have persuaded him to have eased off, but he didn't. He was, yeah, he's a good friend. He was a great drummer. We shared a room. We played some gigs. We did some concerts for Gary. He taught me about monitoring, because he said, no matter how loud you think it is, turn it up, because the fucking audience will be louder. And they were. They were. Especially on Gary's gigs. My apocryphal first ever memory is of Liverpool Empire, when they rolled the steel up, and I just pressed go, and the audience shouted Gary as one. My monitors disappeared completely. And said, I didn't tell you, my dear chap. Yeah, so he taught me that. He taught me about playing in big gigs. And yeah, he was a bad guy. He was a really, really bad guy.